Hello and welcome to the Bhagavad Gita study course. Thank you for being here, and we will begin our meditation. This meditation will be very important to think about pulling in any techniques that we normally use for meditation, and then really trying to focus that deeply at the point between the eyebrows. There's some tips about meditation in this passage, and one of the things that we'll be reading in the Gita today, and one of the things that it talks about is the origin point of your of where your breath is, and so you feel the breath coming in and out of your nose, but where it enters and exits the body, in a deeper sense, is right at the bridge of the nose, at the spiritual eye. And so as you do your breathing, you can think about the cool air coming in and warm air leaving. You can start at the tip of your nose and then go up to the point between the eyebrows, and have your eyes gaze at that point too, just gazing slightly upwards under closed eyelids.
And then we will chant, I will drink thy name. And the words are, I will sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk, oh, with thy name. And get all drunk, oh, with thy name. Get all drunk, oh, with thy name. Om Guru, Om Guru, Om Guru. And now let's meditate.
Om. Just in this last moment here, just take a moment to thank all the gurus, guides, saints, angels, divine beings for coming into your life, into your presence, bringing peace and joy and love, opening you up to the wisdoms of the higher truths. You can slowly open your eyes. So Jim, tell me about the homework.
The homework assignment.
Yeah.
Why don't you go over it again for everyone so that they sort of know exactly what it is?
Okay. I don't know if anyone is going to be watching this later. Are you asking me to do that to trigger it because you don't remember what the homework was?
Well, I sort of remember, but I want to make sure.
What you had to do was come up with maybe about 2 to 3 ways in which you can remember God or Source or the Divine when you feel like you're in a challenging situation.
Okay. I won't go into the challenging situation, but one of the things I did this week was I did japa, which is sort of a repetition of a mantra. And so that was really helpful. Sometimes I forget to do japa, and I don't know exactly why that is. But every time I do it, it's very effective, and it seems to work pretty quickly each time. Another instance was when I actually did some Kriya, and that was helpful as well. It takes a little bit longer, though, for me with Kriya than japa. And I don't know if that's like a common experience for a lot of people or not. But for me, unless I'm in a really, how do I say this? A really, when I'm in a state where I am breathing more excessively, then I find that Kriya works quicker. Because I'm already, my breathing is already very exaggerated and abnormal. So I find during those times that Kriya works better. And interestingly, japa doesn't work as well during those times. And then another time that I did something this week was more along the lines of Hong Sa. And that's interesting too, because I don't know, that seems to vary depending on the situation. Sometimes with Hong Sa, it takes me a little bit longer to become more tranquil or quiet. And then at other times, it seems to work pretty quickly. So I think that fluctuates back and forth. But those are the three techniques: the japa, the Hong Sa, and the Kriya.
Good. Well, and I'm really glad that you came up with actual techniques and didn't just keep it a mental project, because the mental project can help for sure. And I think, though, when we take an action, that also helps in another way, and possibly in deeper layers. The mind in some ways is separated from self-realization, and as we gain more understanding, it's like our consciousness increases with that, but sometimes just because we know something doesn't create the shift that we're hoping for. And, one of the things for me this week when challenging situations were coming up was first the mental understanding that, one, we create our reality. we have so much more power over this world than we think. And the ways that we're defining, life or the world or the way that we should perceive ourselves, this is just something that we create. It can really, really, really be anything. And we just get to create what that story is. And so when you do that, it's, you just remember too that this situation is just this made up situation, and there's something going on for that person, that is agitating, what is going on for them. But then how do I deal with this at a layer of consciousness rather than answering what is going on? In this process of transition that I'm going through, it might be a little bit harder for other people in certain situations than me. And I'm hearing that backlash come back to me. And, I got this really accusatory email, and I realized it was just a lot of misunderstandings, and the misunderstandings, come from, I think, just some sort of stress that that person is under. Because, if you read my email before, it answers sort of the questions that were coming up for that person. And I think too, there's some pressure being put on that person, and they're not communicating everything because maybe it makes them look worse. But then because they don't communicate everything, it doesn't create an understanding for me as to how I need to respond. And so I had to kind of dig through all these layers. But at the same time, I didn't want to play in that game of the vrittis, of the whirlpools. And this is mentioned in the passages that we'll be reading. And it's really something that I try to refer to all the time. But it finally says it in the Gita, the yogas chitta vritti nirodha, which I feel like I'm always talking about. Anyways, it really has become a center point or a pinpoint of my life. And so it was just, how do I respond to the situation and not get caught up in this person's whirlpool? How do I respond to consciousness here? Because a lot of what I will say may just trigger this person to continue that whirlpool. And what is my responsibility in this situation? My responsibility is just that I hold certain knowledge that these people don't, and I need to make sure that that gets relayed to them. And I feel that sense of responsibility. And so I just decided I'm just going to focus on that, because when I'm giving to that person, they feel good. There's a good response, and it's when I say no, there's a negative response. But the thing is that my no's are a no. I don't have either the willingness or the time, or just don't feel energetically like it's the right thing for me to be taking that action. And so I'll just try as possible to avoid no's and just focus on the yeses. So that's like a physical action. But the other thing is to remember to love that person. And when you remember it as a game of consciousness, how do I hold myself in the right place, and how do I send love to this person? And there was just really one, very specific thing that I was just naturally diving into this week, which is just to breathe. Because if we stay in the center of our own spine, then we don't get caught up in these vrittis. Then we can remember the true essence of God, because all these layers are peeled away, and remember to love. And so just regular, like, measured breathing through the spine, remembering the core as to what everything is.
Yeah, very nice. You just reminded me of one other technique that maybe I'd like to share, but I'll leave it open-ended as to when it might be, what's the word, maybe most appropriate to use. Okay, it's not a panacea, but it's pretty close. And it's one that I've picked up along the way, and I don't know if you would be familiar with it, but perhaps you might. I'm not sure. But anyways, it's it goes like this. Basically, what you do is you proceed along the lines. You've got a situation that you're upset, or something emotion-wise is very, affecting you. And so you go into this sort of script, and the script goes without using your thoughts, memory, emotions, associations, or perceptions. Is this event settling, unsettling, or neither? Then you would continue without using your thoughts, memory, emotions, associations, or perceptions. What is this event? And so what this does, it usually will bring the person into sort of a blank state. Because you're not using your thoughts, you're not using your memory, you're not using your emotions, you're not using any associations, perceptions, sensations, intentions, attention. And basically it gets, at least my experience is, it always seems to get me into a very, it's what's called, the person calls it a no state state. And basically when I am able to shift into that, I find that then I'm more receptive. First of all, I'm able to cool down a lot quicker than usual. But then also from that point on, then I'm able to listen more to spirit or God or higher self, however you want to term it. And then be able to create a space in my mind for that knowledge to come through. So that's a very interesting technique that I found myself using more and more frequently as time goes by. That's, I don't know if it's my number one technique, but it's certainly in my grab bag of, up there in the top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to throw that out there to share that with people, because it's one that probably most people have not heard. Unless you're very familiar with the person that I'm referring to that came up with that technique. So, and most people probably.
Who is the person?
The person's name is Stephen Wolinski, Wolinsky.
Okay.
And he was a disciple of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, and was very closely affiliated with him in the late 70s and early 80s, right before Nisargadatta died. So he picked up a lot of little, he actually didn't learn that from Nisargadatta, but he came up with it by himself. He was a trained psychologist, trained hypnotherapist, had done a lot of emotion-based work. And so it was very easy for him to sort of come up with this script to, but it's based off of Nisargadatta's teachings in terms of getting into that, what Wolinski called the no state state, or the prior to consciousness state is another way he puts it. So, but I think that goes, I think it goes well with what you were talking about in terms of body oriented, getting into your spine. Breathing is more body oriented. Hong Saw is another one that you're more, paying attention more to your body. And Kriya, of course, is very body oriented. So to me, it's a nice contrast to go into this, no state or more of a blank state, because it harmonizes really well. Then I'm able to go into something like Kriya or Hong Saw or spine work or breathing, so.
Yeah. So, I think there's really a couple ways that you can approach, challenges that come up. And one is where you create a blank state where you sort of step out of the whirlpool of it, and then you raise your vibration and your consciousness, and it no longer becomes a problem, and you come up with more super conscious solutions.
Right.
And then there's another piece, and what you're saying is similar to what I had in a relationship training program, where they would just take you into like this, what do you really want? What do you really want? What do you really want? And then behind, because often what you think you want is not really what you want, so then behind that, and I think we did the example a couple of weeks ago, is an experience that you are looking for having, and then how do you redefine back to life, because circumstances are neutral, the experience that you want. But it's just taking this another layer too, when you ask the question of what do you want. I mean, what we create as a definition, see, this is where the mon buddhi, the ahankara chitta, the mind and the intellect and all that come together, because the definition that we create about a situation, it is really at its core coming from a desire that we have. And I remember this because I was in a relationship about a year and a half ago, and so many things kept coming up that really bothered me. And he always had these wonderful reasons as to why what he was doing was the right thing and something was wrong with me, that was bothering me. And it sounded very noble and very logical for that to be the case. But it still kept bothering me. And eventually I realized that he was tainting his desire by making it sound like some noble action, or some fear that he had, making it sound like some noble action. And it just opened me up. And I think about it now, too, as I'm going through some, transformation, transitioning to a new place and thinking about things that I didn't like about the old situation. And I say to me, okay, that's a made up story. What if you just took it away and the whole thing wasn't true? Would then your excuse to leave the situation be gone? And the answer is still no. Because actually there was something in me that wanted to leave the situation, and whether or not that's the ego talking or some higher aspect talking, that's the situation. There's something in me that wants to leave this situation, and I couldn't just come up with the understanding that, oh, I just want to leave this situation. And instead you have to make all these excuses about downplaying the environment around you to give yourself an excuse. Like we don't understand the inner depths of what we want, of what we intuit is right. And there's something in us that won't accept that as a truth, that won't just trust it. And then there's something around, and it could be the society's influence, because this desire to leave something, this group, it's looked at as a lower thing. So it's of course very natural for me to try to come up with excuses to make others seem worse, instead of just saying, no, because then you have to take it on you that you're doing something lower by leaving. Anyways, we don't need to go into all this complication, but that's kind of an example, if that helps, of really understanding how do we break down these ideas of the mind, these desires. And a lot of this agitation coming up is just because we're in misalignment with something. There's something in us that we're not acknowledging and acting upon in our conscious mind. And that's the thing that we want to find out. And if we get to a more neutral state, we can find that out. If we take away judgment, we can find that out. So why don't you read the text for 610, and start with just that.
Okay. 610. Free from the hopes engendered by desire and untouched by any craving for possession, the waves of feeling in his or her heart controlled by yoga concentration, The yogi retiring alone to a quiet place should try to unite his little self with the supreme self.
So this is definitely an idea of what we're talking about of how do you calm down the waves. But one of the other points that I feel this is trying to make is saying what's a higher action and what's a lower action. And this is where the quote comes up that when a duty conflicts with a higher duty, it ceases to be a duty.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to ask you the question, what is a higher duty? Here they're saying meditation might be a higher duty. And other times in this book, they're saying your worldly duties are higher duty. For instance, if you have a family, you need to take care of their material needs, their physical needs, and get at least that done. We have Lahiri Mahashaya, though, who he gave what the family needed, but nothing to excess at all. And he spent the rest of his time meditating and teaching, or just having company while he was meditating. I don't know exactly how it all went. And so I want to, throw that question out to you, and then I'll make another point after that.
Okay. Almost simultaneously, when I hear that higher duty, I also think of higher mind. So higher mind as compared to lower mind. Mm-hmm. And what that translates to in practical language is sort of what you were just talking about. You gave a good illustration of, like, if you have a family, then you have certain family responsibilities. So that would be part of higher mind, taking care of the family needs. But also, it's a beautiful illustration with the also being able, once those family needs are taken care of, it's also higher mind to take care of your own spiritual needs. Mm-hmm. So your example of Lahiri Mahashaya doing his meditation, and Nisargadatta was the same way. He was a merchant he was a businessman who had a little, like, grocery store, and he had, I can't remember how many children he had, 2 or 3, I think. And he got enlightened way back in the early 30s, but for the next 30 years, he still had to support his family, so he still went to work every day and minded the store and trained one of his sons, I believe, to eventually take over his store. But when he came home from work every day, he actually built himself a little attic, an extra floor up top. Mm-hmm. And he turned that into his meditation room. So, this guy would work all day and then come home and do, he was already enlightened at that time, but he would just still do his meditations every day. So that sounds very much like Lahiri Mahashaya's situation as well. So I think that's a really good example of higher mind in terms of whatever responsibilities you have. If you're single, then it's more along the lines of the friends that you have, or the community that you're involved with, or the people that you work with. That would be also part of your family, so to speak. And that would be part of higher mind. But I'm trying to remember.
So, I think that's all really, really good points. And I want to add a layer to this. One of the things that sometimes where I question if I should be in relationship or not, because I have to give it time. And I feel like I'm not doing much, or like, for the world, or it might be pointless. Whereas, I have so many gifts and ways that I can help so many people. It's kind of also like, why don't I just spend all my time doing that? Why focus any time on just this one partner just to entertain their ego, basically to satisfy them? Well, one, relationship doesn't have to be that way, about just kind of having fun together and entertaining each other's ego. That you can, in every moment, think about how you're aspiring towards becoming fully self-realized and help each other to that place. And the other thing is that when we talk about meditation, what I've started to realize is meditation is almost like in Ananda Yoga, we have pauses in between each yoga posture where we recenter ourselves and where we remember, to meditate, where we quiet all the distractions so we can get a little clearer again, but mainly where we practice being in a higher vibration. But then we can take that, and in every single moment, that can be our meditation. And really the way that we prove that we have accomplished what we desire in meditation is by being able to bring that attitude of meditation and the relationships that we would think it would cultivate, of feeling love all the time and holding love over the the blockages of jealousy or wanting to be right, or defensiveness or fear. That's what meditation cultivates. And so then we make our daily practice in our daily life that meditation as well. How can I love more in each situation? That's a constant question that we ask. And how do we take every single moment with absolute interest? And I was thinking too about one of my hesitations of leaving Ananda Village is that I'm going to be surrounded by all these lower vibration people. Like, oh no. And then I it just hit me earlier, and it's like and the things they talk about, maybe I'm not interested in them, but actually, let's see if I keep getting an echo. Ooh, we're getting an echo. I wonder if see if that makes it better. No, I have an echo.
Is that coming from my end?
I don't know. Let's see, it stopped just now. What did you do?
Nothing much.
Oh, okay. But it's not the thing that becomes lower or higher vibration. It's what you put into it. I think we mentioned that last week maybe. And so each interaction that you have, it doesn't matter where that person stands, on the judgment scale of vibration. It matters what vibration you put into it. And that's the experience you personally will have. And then it's likely that that person will have an even better experience. So this is going back to what's a higher duty, what's a lower duty, is just to dispel the myth that just meditating is the higher duty. But we want to remember that whatever the poles are from other people, that we can take that time to meditate, that we don't have to get caught up in those poles, because those are karmic egoic things. So we can take a week, a year if we want, or a few hours, a week, a day every now and then, to be silent and to seclude. Mm-hmm. And to say to all these things, it's okay, I'm going to leave you. Because I go back to what I was saying earlier, that really everything is a game of consciousness.
Yeah. And also, this brings up the, I made a point, I wrote something, I think last week on this, with using Jesus. One of the passages in the Gospels on this, of Jesus's higher mind and higher duty. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we have a tendency to worry too much about what the other person is going to do in response to our actions toward him or her. Mm-hmm. And in this certain passage, and actually Swami Kriyananda talked about this as well, and I can't remember exactly now what exactly he wrote, but in the passage that I wrote down with Jesus, he was more concerned about explaining to the Pharisees, hey, you guys are a little bit too legalistic here. You keep all the laws, you work, you wash your hands, you do this, you do that, you got your, I's dotted and your T's crossed, but you're missing the boat here. You know, it's all about love. And you guys are so caught up in the letter of the law that you've lost sight of the spirit of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And really, this sort of just came to me, you know, a few seconds ago. Jesus wasn't really concerned about their reaction toward him. You know what I mean? He wasn't trying to sugarcoat it so that, you know, hey guys, let's all get along here. You know, let's all sing Kumbaya and get in the same boat. You know, he was pretty, you know, laid it on the line and said, you're missing the boat. And he really wasn't too concerned. I mean, he knew their reaction would be very hostile. And, you know, this was another nail in the coffin, so to speak, that he very well knew would lead to further hostility, because he knew that they were so stubborn that they wouldn't change. But he wasn't too concerned about stepping on toes and wasn't too concerned about their reaction toward what he had to share. But he was concerned about, first of all, sharing what he saw as truth, but also sharing it in a, I think, also in a loving way. I think this came across very much to the women that he interacted with. You know, the Gospels are full of accounts where he interacted with women where culturally that was not even acceptable during that time for a man to be talking to a woman, you know, but he didn't care about those cultural mores or societal mores. You know, he saw a need that a particular woman had, and you know, he couldn't care less about what the customs were. He wanted to come from a place of love. And I think whenever a person comes from a place of love, you're automatically performing a higher duty and coming from higher mind. So you know, I think
remember the passage that we read in one of the last classes, maybe in the last one, where it's sort of, you know, the higher self is a friend to the lower self, but to the lower self he's an enemy. Right. And you know, a few months ago, a friend of mine was asking this question, and he was also referring to Jesus and how Jesus angered all these people and had a lot of challenging connections. And he was saying, isn't there a way to do it peacefully? And he was also referring to Ananda, because Ananda has a lot of accusations against us. And, you know, we have a lot of people who have also left this place in a very bad mood. And, you know, I can't say that Ananda is perfect either, and so people might leave in a bad way because there is something to work out there. But you can look at Jesus, you know, and even Yogananda was challenged, and we certainly know Swami Kriyananda was, and you know, many of us also know him to be a very realized and possibly fully realized, you know, person. So you know, is it? I don't know. Can you really succeed and not anger anyone with shedding truth, because you're dealing with you know, and I want to keep going on, but I'll just make this one last point. But you're dealing with breaking down people's egos.
Right.
And the egos are going to fight against that. I mean, that's exactly what the Gita is about. It's the battle of the Kurukshetra. And you also try to resist fighting them because you don't want a reaction. But sometimes, you know, maybe the key is to push hard enough, and despite their reaction, but to push beyond that, to be ready to deal with that response. You know, maybe you could go about the whole thing slow enough where things just fall away and there's no conflict in the process. But there's just multiple ways to go about it.
Yeah, that's the speaking the truth in love, I think is sums it up for me. If I can speak the truth in love, then that's basically all I can do. And there's some personalities also, and this goes back to samskars and all that. Some people are more sensitive to how others will react, and other people don't, you know, care one little bit how another person reacts, you know. So that personality has a lot to play in it here too. But I think Paul, in a lot of his letters that he wrote to the congregations in the New Testament, he would always talk about speaking the truth in love. And Paul is a very fiery dude. He didn't care what you had to say in return. He was preaching the gospel, and this is how it is.
Mm-hmm.
But he also was very tactful enough to say, hey, try to you can speak the truth, but it can be done either lovingly or non-lovingly. And
Mm-hmm.
if you do it non-lovingly, you're probably going to get attacked in return, because that's what goes back to what you were saying about now you're hitting their ego.
Yeah.
You're speaking the truth.
But
they don't want to hear it.
But still, some people are not always ready for that much love.
Right.
And
Right.
they're not always going to comprehend that it is coming from a place of love.
Right.
So
But
we
when
can
it does
still have
come
that
from
reaction.
Right. But when it does come from a higher place of love, then that's where you're doing the higher duty.
Yeah.
And you're also in higher mind. So I think at
Yeah.
that point, you're pretty much have a clear conscience at that point. And then
Yeah.
however they attempt to respond is pretty much more on them,
Mhm.
even though you yourself can sort of help them to respond,
Yes.
more appropriately.
So I want to keep us going, and why don't you read the stanza 611?
Okey-doke. Okay. Oh yeah, this one. The yogi should have a firm, clean seat, neither too high nor too low. He should cover his seat with kusha grass first, then cover that with a deer or tiger skin, and then place upon that a wool and or silk cloth.
So this is this is kind of fun, because when I originally read this, I thought, okay, I mean, that's really not that deep of a thought here. I'm just going to quickly brush over this and forget about it. When I listened to Asha give the class on the Gita, she read that stanza just as powerfully and with just as much importance as all the other stanzas. And you have to think about it too. It's put in the Gita. It's a stanza in the Gita. It's got to have as much importance, or it wouldn't be mentioned with all these other things. So what is it? That's some of the really important things here that we're looking at. I mean, yes, you can follow those specific guidelines. Put this on this chair and this on this chair, and then put this on top of this, and then sit up tall, and we've in the past about you want to sit up tall in a way that your energy can rise up the spine, because that's where we're going, and not have any obstructions in that process. So for instance, hands right in the hip socket opens the heart more and relaxes the arms. It sort of locks your spine into place and your chest open. And then they mentioned Arjuna's bow here, and this is interesting because earlier in this commentary, when they mentioned the bow and the bow slackening, it sounded a little bit like slackening in a meditation, like Arjuna is stepping back from the fear of the battle and the not wanting to cause the challenges and not wanting to cut out pieces of yourself that are represented as your relatives, your family. And but there's another aspect that they're mentioning here, which is dropping the head releases the medulla oblongata, which we call the seat of God, or the mouth of God, the seat of our ego, and that's where the body first forms. That's where we get identified into a body, and so if we don't, if we release the energy there, then we're also humbling and saying, the God's power is greater than your ego, and kind of bowing to that aspect, bowing to a greater aspect. So that's another translation of the bow there. And I think one of the other really important things to look at is these three things that they're telling you to use represent earth, water, and fire. So they represent the first, the second, and the third chakra elements. And above that, it goes into air and ether. So, and what we're trying to do is go into the heart and then the higher chakras through meditation, so that we can transcend the bondages of the body and the bondages of the physical plane. And if you put something in between yourself and the earth that represents those three elements or those chakras, the idea here is that you're protecting yourself from that downward pulling force of the earth. So there is like a deeper significance in there. And then another thing that there's two more points which are kind of interesting, but one that Asha mentions, which is to be conscious. And, you know, and it talks about the tiger skin, but you should only do that if you're practicing sexual control, because otherwise too much of that will come up, because that type of energy can also trigger too much of it. And how much do we put ourselves in environments where it just creates more of the whirlpool that we're trying to get ourselves out of? And then there's this other point that says, you know, preferably from an animal that died of natural you know, methods, but then it you know, mentions, but Yogananda has a bullet hole through his.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and we're going back to, you know, in a way, that game of consciousness, and that for one thing, you know, and what's a higher duty, and something doesn't need to be alive in its physical form. And so if you do happen to kill an animal in order to use its skin for meditation, the point that it's saying here is that may be a higher duty, and you didn't kill the soul of the animal, and it doesn't need to be attached to the body. So you're not necessarily causing harm. You're creating something for, you know, transcending to a higher place. And Asha was saying the story that Master was walking, I forget who he was walking with, but he just went and stamped on a bunch of ants. Like there was a line, a big trail of them, and he stamped on all of them. I think that's so funny, because we think of the history of the Buddhist path, where people would go out of their way not to step on the bugs. And if he's doing that with a consciousness of like, these bugs bother me, or they're a lowly being, so I'm going to kill them. But no, what he said was just, it was their time to die. And this is the game of karma and reincarnation, of evolution, and it's not about attachment to form. So I think that that's something helpful to remember as well. Did you want to add any comments on that?
You just brought to mind something about how in America, the native Indians in America, whenever they would go out and kill some type of animal for food, they would look on it as a sacred rite. They would thank the animal for, you know, giving its life for them so that they could eat at that particular time. So it's sort of very similar, and I think that also is a good example of higher mind or higher duty, where they acknowledge the worth of the animal. And you know, I'm not clear in that example as to whether Yogananda himself, you know, killed the tiger, or whether, you know, it was killed by somebody else and then given to him. But I think it's sort of the same principle, where the tiger, you know, like you said, it was sort of his time to you know, to depart, his prarabdha karma, and yet perhaps that tiger either subconsciously or maybe even consciously knew that he was going to be used for higher purpose.
Yeah.
You know, by dying in such a way. So it's an interesting comment with that.
Well,
Swami threw in
that is really the point. There is that we're also looking at the bigger picture of what creates this higher vibration and this higher consciousness, and so the animal skin is being used for that purpose, and so the soul of the animal goes into that purpose. You know, two quick stories. One is when Swami Kriyananda was getting ready to build on the land for the Crystal Hermitage. The first thing they had to do was take down some trees, because there was no room for a building otherwise. And he just kind of looked, and he's like, cut that one, cut that one, cut that one. Like, he just, you know, he has this picture of the aesthetic in his mind. And there were people that were really fighting against this whole idea. And, just thinking about the tree, and Swami, just said that the tree wants to create a high vibration and beautify things. It doesn't need to be in the form of a tree. And, if that form is blocking something higher from happening, then it's serving a lower duty versus a higher duty. And the other story I wanted to share was we have these wild turkeys at Ananda Village, and they've been here for a couple years, and I think they wanted to feel more and more like they have the control and power here. And so they started to attack people. And they were attacking anyone. And especially when we have guests and little kids running around, we don't want that happening. We were trying a few different methods to see how we could work with them, and none of it was working. And then we were researching, all the different ways of getting the animal removed. And to get an animal removed, you would have to report an incident over a certain time, and you'd have to pay a lot of money. And so we decided, or at least the village council decided, that they were going to go the route of having a local hunter come and just kill the alpha male. And we thought if we kill the alpha male, that will, sort of send a message, and that will stop it for the rest of them. And it happened during meditation in the morning. I think the people who were meditating at the temple could hear it. They tried to usher the turkey a little bit away from the temple, but I think they could still hear it where they were. And the woman from Ananda who was helping with this process, it makes me want to cry right now to think about it. But when I heard her give the voicemail to the community, she gave it so much love. And you could see, I could feel it.
Yeah.
She prayed over it. And it became a thing of consciousness.
Right.
And not of this animal being murdered.
Right.
It didn't get, have a terrible death of being slaughtered by some other animal, coming onto our property, attacking it.
Right.
It was shot in a way that it died right away. And it was in a place where people were praying for it and loving it.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's great.
Yeah. So
that's a really good example of higher duty and higher mind right there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, that goes back to the speaking the truth in love. It's another good example of that.
Mm-hmm. So 612. Seated firmly there, with one pointed concentration of the mind, and neither roaming mentally nor reacting to sense stimuli, let him seek self-purification by yoga practice, using the techniques prescribed by his guru. That part is in parentheses. 613. Holding the spine, neck, and head firmly erect and motionless. Let the yogi focus his gaze at the starting point of the nose, this is what I was mentioning at the beginning, between the two eyebrows, and let him not gaze elsewhere, but keep his gaze calmly one-pointed. These are, the sort of very standard ways that we sit in meditation. And Jim, I know you know a lot about this. I don't know if anyone's going to watch this later and need to know more about this topic. So if you have something you feel like you want to share about that, then you can go for that right now.
Yeah, not really. I mean, I was sort of, I was curious as to why other Sanskrit scholars, for example, didn't catch what Sri Yukteswar caught in terms of the Sanskrit word referring more to, the third eye area rather than to the tip of the nose. And I've always been sort of...
Well, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because I think that Yukteswar was able to come out of Kali Yuga consciousness.
Yeah.
Whereas other scholars, over time got caught in that. That's why Yukteswar wrote the Holy Science. That's why he said the dates that you have for Tripara Yuga are not accurate. Because the consciousness of the world declined, and then a new definition was created based off of that lower consciousness.
Okay.
So that would be my guess. You know, not everyone is going to get all of these highest aspects. You know, that's also why Babaji kept Kriya Yoga in the Himalayas until Lahiri came around, because he wanted it to be preserved. If you read Initiation by Elizabeth Hike, she talks about, you know, the time back in Egypt. And not at the time of the slaves that supposedly built pyramids, but another aspect of the pyramids, because if you look at the facts of what was available during the slave time period, humans would not have been able to make those pyramids. And so she really talked about how, what was it, sound and light projections, that they would be a very strong healing force. And that was the purpose of them. And just these high priestesses of that time would have these amazing powers. And I think even, and I mentioned it last time, didn't I, about the black magic in
Right.
Egypt? I think because they didn't hide the power. So as the consciousness declined, the declining consciousness grabbed hold of the power and used it in the wrong way.
Right.
Whereas if they had a way of hiding that power, you know, maybe not as much black magic would have been developed.
Right. Right.
It just, you know, everything, it makes it all that much easier if we maintain things at its highest vibration, and then we're given it again at that vibration. And we're still just in Japara. So we don't even know, you know, for sure if we have the definition right, or
Right.
if what we have right now are really the highest thing.
Yeah. No. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we can keep going. Why don't you read 614?
Okay. Serene and fearless, steadfast in his vow of brahmacharya or sexual control, his mind controlled and his attention centered in me, capital M, the seated yogi should meditate on me as the ultimate goal of all striving.
I loved it in a workshop that I led in Southern California a few months ago, and I maybe I was talking about meat and how meat creates more sexual desire, and you know, it was under the reasons of why not to eat meat, and he just says, "What is wrong with sex?" And I said to him, "Well, you know what? Sex by itself, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. We've been talking about the game of consciousness, and I think the key word here is control. It's to have the control to move your energy where you want it and to not get caught up in that vritti, in that whirlpool."
Right.
And then, but the other point here too is that if our goal, you know, if on this path, if our goal is to work on how we transcend what is going on in the physical plane, then going into that doesn't help us. It's like going in two different directions at once.
Mm-hmm.
There's other paths, though, that do believe going into that helps you transcend it. You know, go into everything that is right in front of you fully, and then you transcend it. So there's still different paths out there.
Yeah.
But you know what you're doing, and there's an intention behind it, and we're not doing it out of, and Elizabeth Hike wrote a whole book too on sexual energy and yoga. And so, you know, are you going in it for the pleasure and to continue the vritti, or are you going into it because of the purpose of transcendence? And you have to remember that it's not an easy path, and it is like playing with fire.
Right.
So you have to be very careful if that's the path you're choosing.
Yeah, and it's also it brings to mind the attachment issue as well, because you know, sex is one of the most powerful forms of attachment, and it's very difficult once you're hooked to then practice the vairagya or the dispassion or the detachment, the non-attachment. And Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, I always, on my Facebook page, on the Details About You page, where it says list your favorite quotes. That's one of the quotes I have about a half a dozen quotes that I've listed, and that is one of them because it creates, I haven't memorized it, but it creates renewed cravings.
Mm-hmm.
And so there again, the attachment. And I believe it can be done. To me, it goes back to the consciousness of the two people involved. If the consciousness of the two people involved is high, and you're doing it in the sense of helping each other's consciousness to go even higher, then I think it's a technique that you could use. But like you say, it's sort of playing with fire. Eventually there's going to come a time, because it is part of the body-mind organism, there's going to be a time where you ultimately realize you're not the body, you're not the mind. And I think this is the problem a lot of people have, is that they want to have the sex, but they rationalize it by saying, well, we'll have the higher consciousness as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when they're sort of playing with fire, because in a sense, they're right. You can sort of maybe have your cake and eat it too, perhaps, if you know what you're doing. But I guess it comes down to an individual issue between the two people involved. I think it is a beautiful way to help each other go to a higher state of consciousness, but it's very difficult to keep that very pure and untainted,
Yeah.
But there have been cultures and histories, cultures who cultivate that type of sexual control and still enjoying the sex, but with the control issue involved.
Well, even in India, you have both paths. Both are very prevalent in there. And it was so funny. There was a movie that Davey recommended that we see. I think because the actor was the same actor that was in The Answer. And so a group of girls got together and saw it. And there's like these scenes where they're showing the tantric statues in India. And I'm like, what did, Davey have us watch here? But that really reminded me of how inherent and ingrained the tantric path is as well. And, maybe it's a higher, maybe it's a lower path, who knows? But anyways, that is there. So I want to read 6:15, and then I think that'll be enough for today. So the self-governed yogi, his mind fully controlled, attains the peace of supreme nirvana, which is the state of individual extinction, in the union with my spirit. And I love just this statement and the way that that's phrased, the state of individual extinction. Individual extinction. And this is, we've been talking a lot about consciousness, and I think our homework will be around consciousness, because consciousness is in everything. You can't deny that. You can't get out of it. But is the ego implanted in it? Because it's the ego that makes you think something is individual. And so the less and less personality that you cling to, then the more united with the entire universe you become. So as I've been, the first comment was a friend of mine. She was she came to visit recently. She used to live here, and she was talking about how she's trying to figure out who she is and what her identity is. And I just said to her, you know what? We have many identities, because we have so much karma to work out that we could go in many directions, with it. So the point is just to choose one and be that. And I guess I have the freedom to say that because I think about the time when I was leading fitness and yoga classes at 24-Hour Fitness. And I was the main teacher. I was the first teacher. It was a new 24-hour. And I would teach a few classes back to back every morning of the week. And I would go from yoga to hip hop to Pilates. I even taught a class called striptease. And it was just, there were a few other pieces in there, but that was the variety. And when people saw me in one class, if they ever came to another class, they'd think I was a different person. and
Right.
not a different person.
Right.
But I'm bringing forth a different personality or a different type of energy for the thing that I'm working on. When we had a few of Master's disciples come to Ananda village and talk, their perspective of Yogananda was very different, each one, because in some ways he became a different personality to them, not a different person, right? Really a different personality to them. Because, as they're purifying themselves, you have to, work sort of, there is a piece of the personality that comes in order to pull people off of the personality. It's almost in a way that helps them work through their karma until we become more simplified in that. But Yogananda used to, fall down and say, I forgot which body I'm supposed to be in.
Right.
And, I was listening to Matt Kahn again. I mentioned him before. And he, in an interview, somebody asked him, how do you see life right now? So he's just very straightforward and answered. Some people might criticize him for talking this way, but one of the things he was describing, that he just doesn't see himself as a body anymore, and the lady in front of him was not really a body. It was like when you look at an impressionist painting and you have all these dots. So it's just these individual molecules that start to create this form in front of you. And he was just very present in each moment, not remembering the past. And I think he's also possibly transcended time. So he can only be in, in a way in each moment, but he's in all moments, all the time. And I was just, was it Asha? Or maybe it was Matt, I don't know, one of them that I was listening to today. And it was like, because I think about this, when I've had very challenging situations with people, most likely they would repeat that. And so you think you need to protect yourself upon meeting them again. But really the soul's truer nature is the desire to love. And there's this question put out that, what if in each moment you could greet each thing that comes as if it's new, as if, it's your first time. So that you give it a chance also to transcend, and you give yourself a chance to not be bothered by a situation that you were once bothered by. You train yourself to learn how to deal with these things rather than avoiding it or protecting yourself.
And also look, what happens if you look at it like this? Instead of two individuals interacting, it's consciousness interacting with consciousness.
That's great. That's great. So what we're going to do during the next week, let me see if I can formulate this clearly, is just really, within all your interactions, go back to consciousness. And you can even take this idea of consciousness interacting with consciousness. And what consciousness do you want to tap into? What is behind what is happening? And, what if when you're speaking with somebody, it's sort of like speaking, from soul to soul, but speak from consciousness to consciousness. So you don't necessarily need to respond, that like this email I got, it was sort of this whole accusatory thing. And I could write back and defend myself, but that seemed like I was staying in the whirlpool. So if instead I dealt with it on the consciousness level, and I didn't respond at all because I felt like any response at all would go into that karmic whirlpool. But on a separate side, I did something different, which was just sharing, something better, something of better consciousness, the consciousness that he would be excited to interact with. That's what I'm going to focus on, is just giving that consciousness. And I got a positive result.
Yeah.
So it is 7:19. And I know we could keep going on, but I'm going to have to close the evening. And you can always keep writing more on the Facebook group, and others can enjoy the thoughts as well. So thank you very, very much, Jim, for joining me. And I hope you continue to have a fabulous evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.